I'm Tanya Misselt. I'm the director of the River Falls Public Library. Welcome to A Journey of Immigration and a Voice of Advocacy, Part 2. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a in-person audience and we're also live. And this video will also be recorded for later viewing. I would like to introduce you tonight to Marc Prokosch, an immigration attorney based in Roseville, Minnesota, with over 20 years of experience in U.S. immigration law. He is highly regarded for his expertise in federal immigration litigation and appeals, as well as family-based immigration, naturalization, and removal defense. Prokosch is particularly noted for his work in humanitarian aid, helping clients with temporary protected status, deferred action for childhood arrivals, and relief for victims of crime or trafficking. Prokosch also frequently mentors other lawyers and speaks on immigration issues at public forums, advocating for the right of refugees, asylum seekers, and other vulnerable populations. Please welcome Marc Prokosch.
Thank you. Let me pull up my notes here so I can start talking. I have a slide up that is going to come in hand later, so it can just confuse you for right now. So that way you're not looking at that; you're looking at me. So don't look at that yet, because it won't make any sense to you. So thank you. Again, my name is Marc Prokosch. I'm a native of St. Paul. Sorry, but I lived in Hudson nearby in 2023, and then recently just moved to Marine on St. Croix about a year ago. I've been working in the field for about 20 years in immigration law and have had my own firm for about 5 years. I help immigrants and their families get together, stay together, and become U.S. citizens. And my favorite thing to do is to sue the government when they are, not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I know you probably might have better things to do than listen to me talk for too long. So I'm going to try to entertain and inform you so that you don't check your phones too many times over the next hour or so. I do want to get through a few things, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions, whether it's the people here in the room or online. And also, if you don't ask questions, I'm a lawyer, so I can talk as much as you will let me. And so if you don't ask questions, it's your own fault. So I'm going to start by talking through for you a basically thoroughly incomplete history of immigration law in the United States. It should take about 5 minutes, so take notes if you want to. So I'm going to start with the Declaration of Independence as our starting point, and I'm well aware of our cultural significance of saying that we started 1776-ish, but I'm talking strictly within the legal framework, not any cultural aspects of it. So for those first 100 years or so of the United States as a country, we did have a pure open door policy of unimpeded immigration. Basically, you show up, you're good. And in fact, during the Civil War, President Lincoln even signed a law that was called an Act to Encourage Immigration. Interestingly, the only two limitations for those first 100 years on any immigrant coming to the United States were the public charge, in other words, being a bum, and infectious diseases. And actually, those two still exist in some form or another today, where if I'm working on a family bringing somebody to the United States, we have to prove that they will not be a public charge is the legal term, or in other words, be a bum. And that they don't have the legal term is infectious diseases of public health significance. And so those two things from the first 100 years are still in our system today. So the first real restrictions on immigration came in 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act. Americans in California and Oregon were concerned about the influx of Chinese immigrants due to the wars and famine in China and the economic draw of the West. And so Congress actually passed an on its face racist law. We can admit that. And also an interesting history note here is we were all taught in schools about about the Irish potato famine and all of the people that came through Ellis Island. But so, two questions. How many people knew about the Chinese famines in the 1800s? And then my trivia question for you is, does anybody know the West Coast equivalent of Ellis Island? It's Angel Island, and it's just outside of San Francisco. And just as many people came through Angel Island as did through Ellis Island. So, okay, fast forward to just after World War I. Much of the world was recovering from that war and the last global pandemic. Technology was improving, and people worldwide were looking for a better future. And so the early 1920s saw immigrants from all parts of Europe and elsewhere come to the United States. And in response, Congress passed new laws in 1924 that established our first quota systems about how many people could come from which countries. And the limitations were, and I'm not joking here, to make sure we didn't get too many Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans coming from the country. So in other words, that 1924 law was specifically designed to limit Polish, Greek, Italian, and also Asian immigrants. Also, this was the first law that was set up that required a visa to be able to enter the United States, and also set up our first border patrol. Just as a side note, we hear in politics, because immigration is political, we all have to acknowledge that it's a big thing that's talked about. When people make comments about my family came here the right way, before 1924, every way was the right way. So again, I'm a lawyer. The law is basically an exercise of drawing lines. Are you on this side or that side? And those are the lines that we drew in 1924. So now let's fast forward a generation, 1924 to 1965. This is where the immigration laws were completely restructured to eliminate those per country quotas that I talked about, and set up the basic structure of immigration today. It was actually a smaller part of the many more well-known 1960s laws whose purpose was to eliminate various types of discrimination in the United States. You can think about the big brothers and big sisters of immigration being, the civil rights laws, the voting laws. They were all in that same ethos of limiting discrimination in the United States. And that's where some of these charts are going to come in handy when I get to the basics of what we do today in this country for immigrants. Fast forward again now, 1986. See, we've already made it through 210 years in about 4 minutes. 1986 was Ronald Reagan's amnesty. So due to a lot of pressure points with businesses and with communities and states, Congress passed a law to legalize a ton of agricultural workers and a lot of people from the former Soviet countries that had been fleeing the Soviets. And that also made it illegal for the first time for an employer to hire an undocumented worker. The kind of dirty secret to that was, even though they made that a law in 1986, it's very rarely enforced. They're on the books, they just don't get enforced. It also moved up something called registry, which I don't want to get into because that's way over. Even in 20 years, I've had 2 registry cases, so I won't get into that. And okay, moving forward, one more generation from the 1965 laws was 1996. So since a theme here that it seems that generationally there is a significant change in immigration laws. So 1996 is a law passed called what we call IRA. I don't even remember what the acronym stands for. But it was a dramatic shift to add what we call inadmissibilities or bars or bans of people. And just like in the 1960s, where the immigration law was part of a system of changes with civil rights laws and whatnot, think about also the mid to late 1990s. There was a shift and a plan for restrictions. Think about the 3 strikes and you're out laws and the welfare reform laws. So generationally, it's not just immigration, but we as a society seem to, every generation, want to have these large structural changes. All right. So, and this law, the 1996 law, set up the different types of visa numbers and how many visas could be issued, which I'll get to in a moment, which are the charts that I have up there. So, where does that leave us today? Now, let me spend a couple of minutes to try to outline the structure of the laws today, and walk you through some examples. And again, if you have questions, just raise your hand. All right. So to start with, if you are not a U.S. citizen, then you are classified as either a non-immigrant or an immigrant. So if we hear about immigrants, the law actually structures it so non-immigrant or immigrant, and that's the threshold question for anybody navigating the system. So non-immigrants. A non-immigrant is somebody who intends to go back to their home country. And that could be as simple as the Canadian driving down to Thunder Bay to get a beer at the Voyager Brewery and a fish taco at the Angry Trout, to the doctoral student who's going to be here for 7 years, getting a PhD from the smartest professors this country has to offer, who will then go back to her country to be her smartest person in her country. Immigrants, by definition, is everybody that's not a non-immigrant, and so, and that's where we get that term about when we're talking about the immigrants in our country. It's anybody who is not one of those visitors or students or those categories. So there are 4 main ways to legally become an immigrant in the United States, and that's family, employment, refugee, and then there is a lottery. And I'll go through all of those, but I'm going to skip the first 2, the family and employment, and I'm going to go to the refugee because that's what is in the news so much today. First, a definitional thing for you. You hear about refugees and asylees. In a way, technically, they're the same thing, because what both refugees and asylees need to demonstrate is that they are afraid to go back to their home country because of one of 5 reasons. And that is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or being a member of what's called a particular social group. We call it PSG for short. And so think about, race. That would be in Myanmar, it's the Rohingyas that are persecuted by the government. Religion obviously would be what might be going on in Palestine and Israel right now. Nationality, political opinion is the classic. Well, I'm a dissident from like Venezuela would be a political. And then the particular social group might be things like if you are a member of an LGBTQ community or something like that. One of my friends is an asylum officer, and one of her favorite examples was she did an asylum case for a punk rocker from Iran, because Iran didn't like punk rockers. So also, that is forward thinking. It's not looking backwards. So what it is if you are afraid of future persecution. Now, you can demonstrate a fear of future persecution by showing you had past persecution, but the law is actually structured to be forward looking, not backward looking. And so now the difference between refugees and asylees. Refugees are what we hear about from, the Geneva Conventions, the UNHCR, United Nations Human Rights Commission. Thank you. And those are the people that are outside the United States in groups, like in refugee camps. You hear about the refugee camps in Sudan because of the war going on in Sudan right now. The refugee camps in Syria. So the UNHCR processes groups and relocates them to other countries. It might be the United States, it might be Sweden, it might be Norway. We as in the global community that is concerned about human rights will process them wherever they have safety. And so we bring refugees to the United States through the UNHCR. The other is asylees. Asylees are those same type of people who are afraid to go back, but they are people who have made it here. That's what's all in the news. So all of those people that are coming from the southern border who are wanting to apply for asylum, you have to be in the United States to apply for asylum. So refugees and asylees are technically the same. The difference is, where are you in the process physically? Where are you geographically in the process? Now, for those asylees, just for me personally, as examples, I have had photojournalists, I have had public health workers, I've had graduate students, I even had a duly elected governor of his state in his country apply for asylum. Usually these are pretty smart and well-connected people. There was a movie recently called The Swimmers that was about two upper middle class swimmers from Syria that were Olympic quality swimmers. They had the resources to flee to Germany. The ones that don't have the resources are the ones that end up struggling in refugee camps. And also what we see is there are countries like, for example, Ethiopia has a history of what's called a brain drain. The prior Ethiopian governments did not like dissidents, and so they would persecute people in their country that disagreed with them. And so all of the smart people left. And so that's what's called a brain drain in some of those countries. Think, for example, Einstein. I mean, Einstein fled Germany to come to the United States. We loved having him here. In fact, Forbes magazine recently calculated that about 35% of U.S. Nobel Prize winners were immigrants. Now, going back to family visas quickly, and actually I'll switch over to the family visa category. There we go. In order to come to the United States through family, you have to have somebody sponsor you. And it's really very limited in family sponsorship. First of all, you have to be a U.S. citizen to sponsor. And in some rare circumstances, you can sponsor if you have a green card. And you can only sponsor a spouse, parent, child, brother, sister. That's it. So aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, you cannot sponsor them. So it's only that immediate family. And so then what happens is, we think back to that 1996 law that I mentioned as far as how many people can come to the United States legally. Because we always hear people say, well, make sure that you are wait your turn in line. So this is the line for family sponsorship. And I'll briefly explain this chart for you. You see the vertical axis, it says F1, F2A, F2B, F3, F4. Those are categories. So F1 are closer relatives like an unmarried son or daughter. F4 is the farthest away. That's a brother or a sister. And then across the top, the horizontal axis are, where are you coming from? So there are a few countries that are what we call oversubscribed. That's where most people are coming from. And so they have to wait longer. So I want to point out to you the highlighted one for Mexico, F3. So what that is telling you, we pulled this off of the State Department's website just this afternoon. So these dates are current. But what that is saying, you see it says 22 August 00. What that is saying is if that U.S. citizen person sponsoring their adult married son or daughter, that's F3, you can now get your visa if your U.S. citizen sponsor started in August of 2000. So that line for them is 24 years long. That's how long people have to wait in some categories. Okay, so that's family. Correct. Correct. They have to wait in the other country, unless they are here on a student visa, for example. But then they have to stay a student for 24 years. I mean, hopefully we have some people that like being students for that long. But okay, now I'm going to go back to the employment, because some of the employment is even crazier. Employment visas are any business that wants to sponsor a green card for one of their employees. One really good example is a few years ago, Best Buy hired a new CEO who was from France. And so Best Buy had to do a green card for this guy, so that he could come to Best Buy headquarters and work in Richfield. So we do green cards for employment for, Best Buy. Also, me as a Minnesotan, I always thought I wanted to do the green card for Ricky Rubio of the Timberwolves. Wisconsinites might say, well, can we do it for the Giannis for the Bucks? Those they have to get sponsored by those people. But in reality, we're looking at like IT workers, nurses, doctors, paralegals, sheep herders, and ministers, people like that, CPAs, you name it. So now again, so this chart, the vertical chart, when it says first, second, third, that's how skilled you are. Okay. First preference is what we actually call, and this is the term in the law, aliens of extraordinary ability. And so you see that actually for most countries, it's current. So if you are an alien of extraordinary ability, you got a green card just like that. But if you won a Nobel Prize and University of Wisconsin-Madison wants to hire you to be a professor to teach in your field, and you are from India, again, remember what I said about the other dates. That means that even though you are a Nobel Prize winner going to work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, you have to wait 2.5 years before you can get your green card. In the other country. Yes. And also note, again, I mentioned ministers. So if you are a church or a synagogue or a mosque who wants to bring a new pastor or rabbi or imam to lead your congregation, you see on the lowest category there are certain religious workers. It's unavailable. You just can't do that anymore. So there are some categories that just don't work anymore. Finally, I had mentioned the lottery. There actually is a provision in the law where we basically just give away 50,000 green cards a year. Again, we're not going to talk politics or anything like that, but that's something that I feel is outdated. It's called the diversity lottery, and the purpose for it 50 years ago was to increase the diversity of the United States, and I think we've succeeded. And so, if we're going to try to reallocate visas, that might be a place to take things from. Okay. Yes. Those would be other workers. And so if you've got a Mexican or Salvadoran roofer or sheep herder or something like that, you're looking at about 4 years before they can get a green card. So think about being a business owner and trying to plan for your business. This is preventing you from being able to effectively plan for your business because you can't get your workers for 4 years. Who knows what your business is going to be doing in 4 years? Okay, so meaningful immigration reform, is that a possibility? I'll just mention a couple of things. There's DACA. Those are the dreamers. We've all heard stories about the children who were brought to the United States and are still here undocumented. You may have heard Juve's story 2 weeks ago. There's temporary protected status. So that is, for some countries, if there's something terrible going on in that country, we will give you protection for 18 months. And then at the end of those 18 months, if things haven't changed, they'll extend it for another 18 months. People may have heard about certain things being said about Springfield, Ohio, with people with Haitian immigrants. Haiti is a TPS country, and so those people are here legally on TPS. So anyway, talking about meaningful immigration reform. I mentioned those benchmarks, 1924, 1965, 1996. We're at that point where generationally, maybe we are at a point where we can have some meaningful immigration reform because everybody knows that the system is broken. The question is does Congress have the courage to do something? And again, here's where my personal opinion is, even though everybody knows something is broken, there's a belief, and I'm part of it, that leadership of both parties seem to prefer to use it as a weapon against the other rather than trying to fix solutions. So hopefully there might be some change in the future there. But it would take an act of Congress to fix all of those things, like being able to provide an employer with the green cards for the workers that they actually need, or things like that. Let's see here. At about almost 7, and so that's my prepared notes. I'm happy to just tell stories and answer questions. Is there anything online yet, or no? Yes.
Reading a book that said, in terms of Mexicans, we've got a history of in the country in the 1930s of just taking whole families and shipping them back to Mexico. And some of these people, they have been born here. Some of them have been for years, but that doesn't matter. We just got shipped to Mexico. And also in the 60s, I think something like that happened too.
It was called Operation Wetback. So, and I'm sorry, actually, I was told that I should repeat the question before I answer, but you're not done with your question. Mm-hmm.
Are there any political anything that would stop next president from doing that? He has said, "I will bring in his troops to round up people."
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did. What are there laws that keep our country from doing?
So the question is as historical background, in the 20s and 30s, and then later in the 60s, the United States just rounded up large groups of people and sent them back south of the U.S.-Mexico border, many of them likely U.S. citizens or otherwise legal, just as mass deportation. And the question is there a way to prevent that if a political leader wanted to do that again in the modern day? And my answer is I certainly hope so, but that's my flippant answer, but I'll give you then more details. So in the current structure of immigration law, with exceptions, only an immigration judge can order you to be deported. The question is, what are those exceptions? Currently, those exceptions are if you are apprehended by customs within 100 miles of a border and within 14 days of your arrival, then the customs officers can just turn you back around without seeing an immigration judge. The law as written theoretically would allow that to be anywhere in the United States and anywhere up to 2 years. It's just never been expanded because it would be a logistical nightmare to do so. And so that's the law from my understanding, that's the primary law that would be used for somebody who would want to round them up, so to speak. There was talk about the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act. I think that's fanciful to try to bring that up. And so structurally and legally, that's how a government would attempt to do that. But then more to your question, how would they be able to prevent that from happening would be lawyers. There's many people have heard the line from Shakespeare that's famous. First thing we do is kill all the lawyers. It was actually an anarchist that said that. It wasn't, and because it's the lawyers that are there to uphold the law, and the anarchists didn't want it. I think it was a Henry V that came out of. So anyway, the leading organization is called the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and there are 17,000 of us. As an example, in 2017, when the government instituted the Muslim ban, there were a lot of us that went straight to the airport that weekend, and hundreds upon hundreds of lawyers were at the airports trying to help people. So we're a pretty healthy community that would love to be a part of stopping that. Also, I feel that the public wouldn't stand for it because everybody knows somebody who's married to somebody that doesn't have status. If you think about it, everybody will know somebody. That's how I have that's how I can run a law firm. Is I have hundreds of people coming through my door every month, every year, and they're all on a proper legal path. If you can't fit one of these categories, I can't help you. For example, I mentioned the 5 grounds for applying for asylum or for being a refugee. This is a kind of funny but sad story. I had a young woman from Ecuador who came to me and said I wanted to apply for asylum. And so we started talking, and I said, "So what are you afraid of?" And she said, "Earthquakes." And it's funny but sad because it's an unstable geological country, but you're not afraid of somebody harming you, and so it has no grounds for asylum. And so I said, I understand that you don't want to go back to El Salvador or to Ecuador, but I can't help you. So there's that's what I want people to understand is. Us lawyers, and there's always a few bad apples, but generally us lawyers in the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we can only help you if the law allows it. So that's kind of again, I told you I'm a lawyer and I can talk. That's a long-winded answer to your question. If that did I get to everything you wanted to? Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes. Go for it.
He's in his 40s. And he married a woman from Russia. In Russia. I think that's what that is. Anyway, they live in Mexico. They've been living there for over 3 years because she cannot get permission to live in the United States. She's a spouse. They've got some kids now. And she's from Russia. Can an individual have particular reasons why they want to get out there?
So the question is, there's a gentleman, U.S. citizen in the United States, went to Russia and married a woman who has Russian citizenship, and they now reside in Mexico and have 2 kids together. And why can't she come to the United States? One of my favorite professors said the correct answer to every legal question is it depends. And so I would need to know that individual story, but as examples, it might be that number one, they may still be working through the process, because even a really well-prepared case might take a couple of years for a spouse to come to the United States. Or I mentioned the 1996 law that put in all of these bans. She may have something in her past where she's not eligible for a visa. Hypothetically, she may have previously applied for a visa and lied about it. She may have a criminal conviction somewhere. She may have worked for the KGB. Or in one of I think the only area that that the U.S. citizen might be causing the problem is years ago there was a famous case in the news where a U.S. citizen who was a convicted child molester was petitioning for a foreign spouse, and then also basically molested and killed her. So there is a new law that if you have, it's called the Adam Walsh Act. If you look up Adam Walsh, Adam Walsh, I think, anyway, it doesn't matter who Adam Walsh was, but if you are a U.S. citizen and you have a really particularly serious criminal background, we won't let you sponsor a vulnerable person to come to the United States, because we hear about the mail order brides. I mean, many of us know really intelligent people that came to the United States as a spouse, but there's also an equal number of people that were victimized as just a mail order bride. So my guess for that particular case that you're referring to, they're probably just still working through the system. And because if they were first trying to get her visa through Moscow, the U.S. Embassy mostly shut down for visa processing once the Ukraine war started. And then if they switched to Mexico, Ciudad Juarez is where we do visas in Mexico, and they're just always backlogged. So if you put that spouse in, say, France, that's a case that would take about 1.5 years. So even the best prepared, easiest cases takes me 1.5 years to get them here. So 3 years is unfortunately not out of the ordinary. If it got beyond that, again, like I said at the very beginning, I like suing the government when they aren't doing things correctly. And so that might be something where if somebody like that says, I'm just being mistreated by the government, well, then call me. Yeah. And we never know individual details, because everybody says, well, my brother's friend's cousin's sister got to the United States in 3 weeks and she had her citizenship. Well, probably not. And you never know what happened during those stories. Yes.
This year, the Democrats and Republicans about to, or were in agreement to pass a new law about immigration. Do you know, what can you tell us about that? And that's my first question. My second question would be, if you could wave your magic wand and you could change maybe 3 things, what would that?
Sure. So the first question was the bipartisan border bill from February or so of this year. What was it and what would it have done? And it would have done a couple of main things. First of all, it would have provided more money for customs for things like increased Border Patrol officers, better technology for finding fentanyl and other illegal drugs, and support like that. And also it would have tightened the requirements for asylum. When we were talking earlier about if you set foot in the United States and you are afraid of going back to your home country, some of the more technical requirements were going to be tightened. There would have been actually one of the things that was in that bipartisan bill. President Biden pulled out and made an executive order. It's called the Secure Legal Pathways Rule, which basically means if you are from, let's say, El Salvador, and you walk through Mexico to apply for asylum in the United States, well, you left the country you were fearing and you went through another country. Why didn't you seek safety in that middle country? And they may have valid reasons or not, but that's now an executive order that if you travel through a third country, and there are exceptions to it, but generally the tightening of the restrictions are, why didn't you seek refuge in the first place that you could have because you were fleeing your own country? So those were the two main parts of that bill, and it was crafted mostly by James Langford, who's a conservative senator from Kansas, and it would have been a bipartisan bill. There was a lot of support for it, but those were the two main things: more resources, both in money and people, for the border, and tighter restrictions on asylum. Does that answer that question? Okay. Then the second question was, if I could wave my magic wand, what would I do? It's interesting because I'm, even though I'm an advocate for immigrants and their families, there are abuses that drive me crazy. So you may hear of people who have fraudulent asylum claims where they come and then they just make something up. That ruins it for the people who actually fear returning to their home country, and it makes judges skeptical of all claims, and so that's not really answering your question about waving a magic wand, but I'm prefacing that by saying I'm not just a peer advocate. There are things I want fixed, but I think the number one thing would be to just increase the number of visas to conform with our growth in population. The visa numbers were set like 30 some years ago when our country had like half as many people as it did. There was somebody in the audience who was asking, if you're a business owner in Wisconsin who's looking for people to help with the farm, we can't get them a green card for 4 years. And so how is that going to help that U.S. farmer make their business functional? And so updating those visa numbers to better reflect our population would be one big one that I would do. And that'd be an easy one. And you could even peg that to the economy. If unemployment goes up, then the visa numbers go down, or something like that. I've said before in groups that the best idea would be to take an advocate like me and a good government attorney and lock the two of them in a room and make them figure it out. Another one is, so a few years ago, there was an attempt at comprehensive immigration reform. And the proposed bill was about 960 pages long, because each little interest group and each congressman and woman wanted their own little things in there. But one simple way to fix the complexity, I had mentioned briefly before, the term registry. Registry has been a part of our immigration laws since the beginning, where if you're in the United States, you can register to become a permanent resident. But it's not just that. You actually have to be a good person. There's actually a good moral character provision in that. And so if you're a criminal, you can't apply. If you are a fraudster, you can't apply. But the law currently says if you are a person of good moral character and you have been in the United States since July 1st, 1972, then you can apply for a green card. it would be simple to just change that registry date, because you're still then only giving green cards to non-criminals, to people who live here, have family here. It would be a very simple fix instead of a 960-page bill. It would just be tweaking one statute. And there have been, I think it was Senator Padilla from California that has proposed that, but it's probably not going to go anywhere. So that's two. A third, I'm going to just leave it at two. Yes.
Like cultural workers, we plan workers. And I think my question follow-up then would be, is there any path if folks came here a long way, so they don't have a case for asylum, but they are here and they are, is there any path for them to kind of quote unquote get legal, or are they just stuck?
So the question is those farm workers, those people in meatpacking plants, the agricultural workers who came, quote, the wrong way, and don't have any plausible fear of going back. So in other words, an economic migrant, so to speak, is there anything that they can do? Any path at all? And the shorter answer is no, there isn't. And that's why we have 14 million undocumented people in this country, because for a lot of them, there is no path. I mean, there are some creative ways if you have unique circumstances. For example, if you were trafficked by your employer, then you can apply for a type of visa for victims of trafficking. If you have a family in the United States, like a U.S. citizen-born child, there's a really difficult pathway to get a green card through that way. But generally, no, and that's why we have that many undocumented people. Any questions online? No? Any last questions here then? All right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, let me just show a couple last quick slides. I told about refugee admissions. So refugee admissions get set by the president every year, and it fluctuates obviously by who's in the White House. So it's been flat for the last 3 years, but obviously that goes up and down. And then these are the numbers of how many people are applying for asylum. It is just crazy. There's hundreds of thousands of people coming to the United States applying for asylum, which is why, just as a very quick example, one of my clients that I'm still working on was my very first client in 2006. I'm still working on his case. He now has a wife and 2 kids, and so we're looking at other options for him. But yeah, so more. He came to the United States legally back then on what was called a V visa, which does not exist anymore, which, because it doesn't exist anymore, it limited his ability to become a permanent resident. So he's in kind of this gray area. Oh, the question is, how could he even be here for 20 years? With all of that, and the answer is he did come legally on a visa that is now defunct, and so he's just been in this gray area for like 20 years. So there we go. Now I'm done. Thank you.
So I would like to thank everybody for coming today, and for those watching online live, and for those who watched virtually with the recording, thank you very much for participating by watching. And I want to tell you about the next program coming up at the library, a harvest of poems, followed by an open mic on Thursday, October 24th at 6:30 p.m. in the library, and that's in person and virtual. I'd also like to remind everybody that almost all of our programs here at the River Falls Public Library are paid for by donations to the River Falls Library Foundation. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.